You're listening to The Real Deal Conversations, a podcast designed to encourage, inspire, and equip you by sharing real stories and meaningful conversations that bring real life to the surface. I'm your host, Megan Deal. Let's dive in. I am with Jessica Broadway today. Jessica is a mindset and success coach. She is also one of my friends. And just a fun fact, Jessica and I have been here about 30 minutes already talking and late to recording because, again, we're friends and we just keep chatting. So we are finally getting to recording. And Jessica is going to come on. She's been a mindset and success coach for like 10 years, you said, around 10 years. And kind of a lot of certifications. We got some ADHD, we got some neuro certifications, we got,
grief specialist. I like to collect certificates.
Yeah. You're a lifelong learner.
I'm a lifelong learner, and I am a subject matter expert and lived experience expert, right? So if I find it interesting, I'm going to go down the hyper-focused rabbit hole of learning all I can learn about it.
Yep.
And then looking for unique ways to apply that to help other people be successful.
Yes, which is great for being a coach.
It's really why I went with mindset and success coach, because at the core, it really is about bringing different modalities together to help you create successful systems for your life so you can show up and effectively be a person of impact and create what you wish existed in the world successfully.
Yeah.
So whether it's parenting, any number of things, we're going to coach you towards success.
Yes. No, I love that. And one of the things that we talked about that we kind of want to hone in on today in mindset and success is grief.
Grief. Good grief.
Yes, and the variations of grief, which I'm not going to explain too much of it, but I do want to say that it was actually mentioned, somebody mentioned it in the context in which you want to talk about it yesterday organically. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because Jessica's going to be talking about that. But it was the but the change of the season and going from working and being fast-paced in career to slowing down, like purposefully slowing down, not losing your job, but actually purposely. And she's like, there's some grief in that. And I immediately was like, oh, Jessica's going to talk about that tomorrow, that type of grief. And so kind of explain, because there's grief in loss of people, a death.
Right.
And that's the one that's the most common, that most people go, oh yeah, that's grief. What is the other type of grief though? So
this is a topic that I'm so passionate about, and I kind of ran from, to be transparent. I was like, I don't want to be known as the grief girl. Yeah. I don't want to get frozen in time in some version of me that you think is obsessed with this topic about grief. And then I was like, fine. They say like the one thing you're avoiding is the way, right? Mm-hmm. So let me back up a little bit. I went through a season of my life where I couldn't think it out and I couldn't pray it out. And I was qualified to do both. I have a background in degrees, psychology, biblical studies, and family studies. And so I was, kind of, if you're on the spectrum of being qualified to do both, right? Mm-hmm. And here I am totally paralyzed, and I can't see a path forward, and I can't think it out, and I can't pray it out. And so I'm going through this bit of an existential crisis of, if I can't do this, like, I'm one of the most optimistic people that I'm successful in business. I'm have a magnetic personality. I'm always happy. I'm the eternal optimist. And like, here I am just feeling completely stuck in life. Mm-hmm. And so I began to explore. Someone had said, well, you're grieving. I was like, yeah, I know I'm grieving in the way that you explained, right? Uh-huh. That there's this one event that I can recognize as grief, but it felt so displaced because I understood that grief, I knew it, and yet I could not relinquish that grief. I couldn't move beyond it. Mm-hmm. And then I became increasingly frustrated with the box that grief has been put in. Mm-hmm. With things like, it's a neat, tidy box, right? There's 5 stages, and you should be able to quantify those. And some more recent information is expanding that version. They're kind of doing away with that, and they're being like, it's, fluid, and there can be all these different types. Mm-hmm. But it still wasn't really connecting with me, because while I recognize, so we kind of sort grief into 2 categories, acute grief and then residual grief. But more importantly, what I want you to know is that it's not, the grief is what we see. But before that, it's what we call loss. So when I started diving deep into this, I went to a retreat for people who were grieving, and I learned something that changed my life. And this was like 11 years ago. Changed my life. And they said, loss is a change in a pattern of behavior. And then the emotional response that we have to that loss is grief. And that changed my whole perception of how I saw grief. Because of what you said, you know, we say grief is the 3 Ds: death, divorce, and disease. That's what we recognize, but there's this whole category. So there's over 43 different types of loss a person can experience in their life.
That's incredible.
Yeah, 43. And then there's this one category that's called disenfranchised loss, or the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. Those are the things that are intangible that we can't touch or feel or label. And when I heard that, it was like this little part of my soul was like, and that's what you're supposed to help people with, right? Not the stuff they recognize, because we are such resilient people that when we can name it, we can claim it, so to speak, right? When we can figure out what it is, then I can do the work I need to. I can process. We're so resilient, and part of the neuroscience coaching that I do talks about neuroplasticity and increasing our capacity for dealing with adversity. So we're super resilient human beings. And my papa used to say, it ain't the stuff you think you know. It's the stuff you think you know that ain't so. That's what'll get you in trouble. So this stuff that's unknown, that you can't put your finger on, that's just kind of ingrained in your pattern of behavior, that's the stuff that's getting people stuck. And so it became a passion of mine, because when I went to this retreat, I was like, well, I know why I'm here. But as soon as I heard everybody else's story, I was just like, okay, I don't deserve to be here, because I was comparing my loss to their loss. And I was feeling like I didn't have permission to grieve what was quote unquote normal grief. But then when we talked about the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations, that really hit me, because it wasn't really the presenting grief, the acute grief that I was dealing with. I was actually grieving the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations, all that could have been and that won't be because of this change in my life. And so, like you said in the beginning, when you opened with that grief that she was talking about, that's what we call transitional loss. It's a change of how things were into what they are, a change in a pattern of behavior. And so the emotional response that comes with that is grief. But unless you know how to process the emotion and how to work through that and process the loss in a healthy way, there's a lot of ways that you can go sideways on that deal.
Well, sideways, and I think it can make us second guess the decisions we have made.
100%.
Because we're making decisions, but because there's a natural grief that can come with that, like the example, I just left my role at Big Brothers Big Sisters and rolled on as a board member. I left as a staff member because I have the podcast. I was full-time staff. I do keynote speaking. I'm mom. I'm wife. I ran for school board last year. Like, I burnt myself out, but then also felt the Lord calling me to focus more specifically on my mission in speaking in the podcast. And so I really had to grapple with that for a little bit of that decision. And I knew what the Lord was calling me into, which was, that focus. But I also knew dual part is I also needed a break from how burnt out I caused myself to get. So it was like two. So I made that decision, and my identity was in Big Bro for a little bit. I mean, everybody's like, oh yeah, Big Bro, Megan, Big Bro, Megan, Big Bro, Megan Community. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely. And so that grief, we talked about, my experience with that is, okay, there is a loss there. There is a loss. And it could make you, if you're not familiar with the fact that it is the natural process of grieving, it could make you go, did I make the right decision? You're absolutely right. And so I love that you brought that up, because that is the part where I'm like, let me talk to you about this, please. Because we automatically associate loss with negative, right?
We associate grief negatively. But tell me about the good grief in life, right? The stuff that can be, so grief is the emotional response to loss, or it can be the conflicting feelings that you have following a loss. So you could be in a situation where there is, like what you said, where you left one season and embraced another. You had conflicting feelings. That was your grief response, was conflicting feelings. And so if you, like you said, didn't have the education or the awareness to say, oh, I recognize that I'm going through a transitional period of life and that there is a change in my pattern of behavior, and you become super excited, what I call noticing and wondering mindset. So I notice that I'm having these conflicting feelings and I'm wondering what they're connected to. And when you can say that, I'm both happy and I'm sad, instead of having to be happy or sad.
Yes.
That's where the real emotional dilemma comes in, those dialectual dilemmas that we have where two things are true and we feel forced to choose one, right? So something can be true in two circumstances. It can be true. You don't have to be an either or. And you said something, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
You said that you were burnt out.
Yeah.
And controversially, I say burnout's a cop-out.
What?
I know.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Okay, so burnout, what if I told you it wasn't burnout, but it was grief?
Yeah.
Right? And it was, you were sitting in that moment and you're like, I'm burnt out. Here's how I know it's not burnout, and here's how I know it's not burnout and it is grief. If I had a magic wand and I said, and this is something that I tell everybody, ask, like, if you want to know if you're dealing with grief, ask yourself this question. What area of your life, multiple maybe, or one, do you wish things were better, more, or different?
I wanted more time with my family.
Right.
And not to be a shell. Correct. When I'm with them.
So because you could, like, better, more, or different, right? You weren't burnt out. You just had an abundance of things you wish were better, more, or different, and you didn't see a way out. And the reason that I know, like, to say to what you said, if we could have given you a magic wand and said, okay, Megan, you have infinite time now, you would have been refueled with an energy and a excitement to be able to do both.
Yeah.
Right? But you came to a season where you're like, something's going to have to change. I'm going to have to say goodbye to one season in order to embrace another. So it's not that you're burnt out. It's that you reached a cumulative space in time that you had an abundance of things you wish were better, more, or different, and you couldn't change them.
So, okay, so do you think burnout is real at any capacity?
I think that's what we call it. Yeah. Right? But we also cop out, like we just quit. We don't problem solve. And you hear this a lot in education, is that teacher burnout. And when in fact it's not teacher burnout, like they're not burned out of teaching. They have an abundance of things they wish were better, more, or different, and they don't have any way to do it. So they retire or they move on and they can't change it. They hit a roadblock. So I understand the familiar phrase to label things because it's socially recognizable. When you say I'm burned out, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. I'm just offering the idea that burnout could represent something more. Yeah. And that if we were given the space and the time to problem solve, you may decide that there is no path forward and that you do need to, but don't just label it as burnout, because great possibilities, great things can be accomplished. Or we can say, I know that I have reached the end of the season and I can move and process the stuff around it a little bit better instead of feeling powerless or overwhelmed or like, all of those feelings. Instead of calling it burnout, we can say, I recognize I've reached the end of this journey. I have an abundance of things I wish were better, more different. There's no path forward. So that means we have to pivot. I have to appropriately grieve the season of change, knowing that we just end of our relationship here in the way that it existed before. So I'm not saying burnout's a bad word. I'm just suggesting that what if we use that for some strategic problem solving instead of seeing that as an ending? Like, we could problem solve a little bit better. We could help people deal with the emotions behind things.
No, I was definitely at capacity. I'm going to have to think on that. I'm going to process that. I'm going to kind of like mull on that. Yeah.
Just the idea that
Yeah.
You are grieving the abundance of things, the loss of time, the loss of energy, the loss of resources around that season, and it just became cumulative. And you're like, I got to do something different. Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a process to that if we explore that, we could say, okay, how do I not get in that space again? What would I need to put in place that would help me avoid burnout in the future? Or what guide rails need to guide this next season of my life?
I think, we just in regular conversation talked about this. Like when we do something, the way our brains are wired, we come in like it will be done to its best ability. Like it will be done. I'm not going to go I'm not going to half anything. The week I left Big Brothers Big Sisters, the week I rolled on as a board member, not staff member, I was still hitting goals that were like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I will, that's my downfall though, is because I will do everything to my best ability. And I'm a goal crusher. Like you give me something, like that fuels me, like knowing, but I also do that to myself. Now I'm competing with myself. I don't compete with other people. I compete with myself.
Right.
I just did this. How do I outdo myself now? How do I keep, and I'm constantly going, And so when I have Big Brothers, Big Sisters, when I have keynoting, when I have the podcast, when I have all this other stuff that I'm doing, I can't slow down in any of it. And so then I'm like fried. I'm fried. But the strength in me, I have the strength to recognize when I'm at capacity. I have the strength to go, I need to cut back. I need to do this so that it can flourish and thrive. Because I get to the point where, I'm hitting goals. But if I don't have like that genuine spark and light with the gifts that I've been given, it's not fun. So I'm hitting goals, but it's not fun because I said it on the podcast the other day. We're given gifts. We are given gifts by the Lord. But if we abuse our time and we spread ourselves too thin, the light, that joy, that spark gets diminished. The gifts are still working, but the joy, spark, and all of that is like gone.
Yeah, you lose the sense of fulfillment, right? In the journey, you got to fall in love with the process of becoming in so many ways. And as a high achiever myself, I recognize that. And just to challenge for you and for me and other high achievers is we have to be really self-aware that that we don't take an identity in being a high achiever. So what I mean by that is when I went through my season about a decade ago of not being able to think it out and pray it out, as I call that whole season of life, is that I felt really frustrated with and fed up a little bit too, because I realized there was a lot of versions of me, but they were catered around the version that best served you and best served you and best served you. And so I didn't know who I was without all the roles that I play in people's lives, right? Because I'm a high achiever, so I'm going to be the best friend I can be. I'm going to be the best mom I can be all these things. And when I was faced with that season of not being able to be the best, I felt really undervalued as a human being. I was like, who am I without all my successful, I'm a good mom, I'm a good friend, I'm a good this, I'm a good that, right? So yeah, it's unhealthy, but I think it's common that my identity became wrapped up in the performance of life, in being good at a lot of things, that when I wasn't able to effectively show up in those areas, I had to really struggle with who I am without all the things, without all the roles, without all the goals, without all the successful experiences. Who was I when I didn't have anything to offer? And I'd ask myself hard questions. I didn't know if anybody would pick me, right? Like, if I am not the version that serves you, then do you pick me because of who I am? And then it was like, well, who are you? I don't know. I've been so busy trying to be the version that is best served to you that I don't know who I am without the role that I play in the world.
But you know what? That actually what's coming to mind for me is, and I kind of want to say this, I think a blessing for me was being a stay-at-home mom for so long.
Sure.
Because I did find out what is my basis? What is the things that, because I wasn't in a position to be in the forefront. I wasn't in a position to be, and it was like, so I want to encourage, actually, I really want to encourage moms who are in the stay-at-home position right now with young ones, or you're homeschooling and that's why you're like, this is actually kind of an ideal time for you to know, because you don't have anything around you that you're having to please and identify. Give me a better wording. Identify to, what's a better word?
So like I call it performance-driven behavior.
There we go.
Right? So
Yes.
I still do all the things that I used to do, but they're fueled from a different space.
Yeah.
Because I know that I am not the accumulation of what I do.
Yes.
But I am who I'm meant to be. Like my purpose is in being who God created me to be, not in the things I do in the world. And so if I just get really good at being me, creative, engaging, friendly, hospitable, a place for people to come and talk and share and collaborate. If I get really good at being that, right, and being the best version of that, of who God created me to be, then anything I do is a fulfillment of the purpose. And as a mom, our identity we can be caught up in the identity of motherhood really a lot, right? We talked about this before, the different seasons of parenthood. And as soon as you think you got it down, they change and they grow. And then you have to grow into another version of your role as a mom. And over identifying that, and you see this transitional loss too, and like empty nest syndrome, is I don't know who I am without my role as a mother. I'm always a mom, but this role. So grieving, like that can be part of who you are and what you do in the world, but the role is going to change all the time. And so we have to be good stewards of the roles and the relationships and the gifts and talents. It becomes about stewardship, not ownership, I think, in that respect.
I love that you said the growth, like grieving who we were and then like coming, because I think something that I have to navigate, and we all have to navigate, but maybe what I'm saying is kind of putting words to it for the first time. I don't know, but for some of you, that growth, because growing out of things, growing out of personal growth, things that I needed to grow through, things that I didn't need to do anymore, things that I, insecurity. But the thing with this is what is so interesting, some of that did give me ability, empathy. It gave me, so those weaknesses that I grew out of, there's still value to them. And so it's going into your new growth phase of being more secure or more confident, whatever. But then also being like, okay, how do I still take some of old me along with new me? Because there was value to those weaknesses. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It's like this weird balance.
So I like this really good analogy is you're on a stage and the audience is full of people from every journey of your life, right? And this mic ascends from the floor and you step forward to speak. And the world is waiting to hear what you have to say. And all of a sudden, it's like an accordion, like you just separate into all these versions of you, right? The tough one that's going to handle it, the victim version of you, the broken part of you, the sickly version of you, the whatever, all these versions of you separate, and you all start fighting over the mic, like who's going to speak for her, who's going to speak for her. And then in this still moment, you realize that the most powerful voice you'll ever have is the one that speaks for all of you. Right? So you don't have to tag in different versions. You can love all of who you are. And you all come back together in this like crescendo. All those versions come back into this one singular voice that speaks, that honors the tough version of you, the confident one, that honors the fragile version of you, the vulnerable version of you, the sick version of you, the healed version of you. The complete version of you honors every stage of your journey and without shame. So safe sharing begins where the shame ends. We're not going to be able to engage in life with others and do life and build community where shame is part of the conversation. So it doesn't matter what version you are today. it matters that you have compassion and that you honor the journey and trust the process of becoming.
And for the people who have been in your life for a long time, who are like, you recognize it as, okay, I am now this way because of my growth. But those people haven't caught up. And so it's like, well, who's this version of Megan? And it's like, well, this is the growing version of Megan.
That's uncomfortable for people.
It is. Yeah. And then feeling like you have to, it's like, okay, well, how do I make it comfortable for these people? How do I explain? Like, there's so much to growth. I don't think, and I think there's just so much to growth. There's so many aspects of growth. Growth is a beautiful, amazing thing. And I will be doing it, praise the Lord, till the day I die. There will never be a time I'm not growing. That's how it should be for everybody. We should be lifelong learners and growing and all the things, and self-aware and pruning ourselves and going, okay, what can be done better? What needs to be? But there's that grief, but it's not just a personal grief. It's like the grief in your relationships of navigating, okay, well, now I am going to start being a little more, because I used to like shy away from conflict, not because I'm not good at it, but because I am so direct. I just always have been. And I don't know how to sugarcoat things. So I just tend to pull back so that I don't upset people. Because in my life growing up, if I did something wrong, like if something was done wrong, there was extreme consequences. There just was. And so, or I would be the one to see certain bad behavior. And as a child, I would be the one to see it and have to call it out or not call it out, but I always chose to call it out. And then there would always be like extreme consequences. So then I just learned to avoid conflict so that I didn't have to deal with the effects of it. It's not that I'm not good at it. And it's not that I don't have a voice. It's that I have just learned over time, like, I really don't want to deal with the downfall of this. So I'm just going to hold back, which I'm starting to heal that part of me in growth, and therefore starting to pull back that part of me out where I'm just going to start saying what needs to be said in a loving way still. But I also, again, I am very direct. I'm also in the neurodivergent space. So I don't know if that's why I'm direct. I don't know if it's just, that's how I am. Doesn't really matter either way, to be honest. But also the way my brain works, I like to explain things. So maybe that's why I'm going down that rabbit hole. But do you know what I'm saying though?
I really do. A couple of things about what you said is that when people don't want to grow with you or don't have a shared experience that was a catalyst for a season of growth, right? So we all have our own comfort zones. Your brain is hardwired to get back to homeostasis as soon as possible. So it looks for patterns of recognition in relationships with yourself and the environment, and then it will create a comfort zone that creates psychological safety that allows your body to be at rest, right? So we don't like new information, but we know that growth happens when we seek new information. And because we're all traveling together, you could have a different life experience. This is why we don't compare loss. So we can say we have a shared, a similar experience, right? We have a shared event, but the impact of that is like saying, okay, Megan, you have 10 fingers, right? I have 10 fingers. That's like we both experience loss. But if I try to say, Megan, your fingerprints are the same as mine. No, there's like not even an argument. You just know that that's different.
Right.
It's the same way with grief. So we can't ever compare grieving experiences because they're as unique as your fingerprints. So how your life impacts you will send you on a growth journey that you need to reconcile the differences. And this is how I thought life was going to be. This is how life's turning out to be. And so those experiences are going to be different person to person. So sometimes you just have to allow someone, hey, I recognize that you haven't had an experience that caused you to need the growth, or to, I'm just going down a different path. And so sometimes we're traveling with people and we have expectations. I had to grieve this just recently. I had expectations for a relationship to mature, and we started off on the same path. I had expectations that it would grow in a particular route that it didn't. And then I found myself holding back so I could continue on with that person instead of appropriately saying, hey, I recognize that I am loving you from a version that I wished you would be versus what you are. And that's okay. And it's not fair to you for me to continue to show up expecting you to be where I need you to be so we can go together. And I've been doing this for like a decade, and I'm still learning that lesson of when is it okay, or how do you release someone to their own journey versus encouraging them to grow with you because it's super fun over here and I want to go with you. I don't want to, but you cannot allow yourself. So I have this saying that I had to change the way I thought because a lot of people say like, I don't care what other people think. I care a lot what people think. I care what you think right now. I care what these people are thinking right now, listening to us. So when I said I don't care, I caused a part of me to shut off, dissociate from life, put up a wall so that I wasn't impacted by feelings because, sticks and stones and all that, right? So I had walled that part off so I could just, tough it out. The freedom I found in saying, I care a lot what you think, Megan, but I'm not going to allow what you think about me to stop me from moving forward anymore. Right? Yeah. So then I can honor that part of me that cares deeply about what you think. It feels, but I'm not going to allow that to hold me back.
Because two things can be true.
Right. I can care what you think, and I can still choose to move forward with what God has called me to do.
Yeah.
Man, the freedom in that to say, I really care what you think. I really want you to like me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to allow whether you like me or not to hold me back anymore. Do you see how much more freeing that is instead of saying, I don't care what people think?
Yeah.
Anyone that tells me that, I have real red flags.
Well, my thing is, somebody actually said that the other day. They're like, I don't care what people think. Actually, the fact that you're saying that tells me you care what people think.
Yeah, and it's shame-oriented language, right? Because it might be posturing in one sense, a confidence booster for one, but it's very shaming of others that might feel like that. And so then I might be thinking, gosh, I care a lot what people think. I must be weak. I need to toughen up on what I think of other, etc. Right? And so again, safe sharing begins where the shame ends. Yeah. And so making sure that we are really shame-oriented language is really prevalent. It's in everything. The hustle mindset has a lot of shame language in it.
I would agree.
Fake it till you make it.
I would agree.
All of that. And I'm just really anti any of that. And it's. I don't think people do it intentionally. I think it's just part of our cultural stuff, and so I get real fired up about the study of neurolinguistics essentially says that the words we speak shape the way we think, and the way we think shapes the way we live, right? And we know that scripture says, so as a man thinketh, so shall he be. And so if you're thinking about I'm just hustling and grinding, like if you took the literal, I love literal etymology, the study of words and stuff. So to grind something is to make it unrecognizable. Do you want to live a life that's grinded out?
Oh, wow. That's good perspective. I love that.
Hustle is like literally being dishonest. It's not about speed. It's a hustle is disingenuous. And I know that not everyone's as like literal thinkers as I am, but like
it is actually really good perspective. Yeah. Because again, the hustle and grind, coming out of the gate hot, being like, I will do everything to my best.
I have the t-shirt. I have the t-shirt. I'm a hustler.
Yes. And how unrecognizable do we become to our family?
Yeah.
And I success in the hustle and grind. I've said this before. I really had to learn what success is. And success is not how much I'm doing. It's not the hustle. In my personal opinion, for me, I'm not saying you guys have to have the same definition. For me, success is how well am I able to be who I need to be for my family first. And if I cannot be who they need first, I am not successful, because the people who matter the most got my worst. And success in any other way is obsolete and that's where the hypocrisy comes in, especially in ministry, I think. When you're doing stuff in mission and ministry and you're in the name of God serving people, but your family gets served last, I think that's where a lot of like ministry kids come out. And ministry, guys, is not just being a pastor. Like my podcast is my ministry. And I think a lot of people think that though. My keynote speak, and so when you're doing things in that, and then your family's like, yeah, but my whole life I saw her just tired giving us our worst, but serving you. And I think that's where kids come out of that going, screw Christianity and ministry.
So my background is I was raised on the mission field. I lived in Scotland till I was 12. My parents were lifelong missionary and in ministry in various forms. And I wrote an essay in 7th grade that the very thing it's called The Very Thing, and it was essentially the very thing that's supposed to bring us together, in fact, divides us. Wow. And I missed the presence of my dad because he was always out campaigning and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so it's a real vulnerable space to me that, and people have said this, and they do say this a lot to women who are ambitious and who act with purpose in various ways, right? Whether you've got a home-based business, whether you're a crafter, whether you're a professional expert volunteer, whether you're fully engaged in motherhood, and everything about that, there will always be this, don't forget your priorities, is the cautionary tale, right? And I appreciate the warning. It also felt very shameful of me doing the things that I wanted to do. And so it is a very touchy subject for me that I'm always afraid that my things that I do in the world are going to cost me more than what I was aware of. And something I studied years ago was studying in the book of Jeremiah and what God told Jeremiah to tell the Israelites. Have I shared this with you before?
No.
Okay, this is a great story that I love to do this talk on about what waiting in the exile or waiting for God to move in your life and what you should be doing. And this gets skipped over a lot because we always quote Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, right? As an anthem for avoiding the current frustration, right? So it's like the pivot. I don't like the way I feel right now, but I know that God has a plan for me and better times are on the horizon. We don't ever think about what do you do when the things are frustrating.
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you back up, so that verse hit me really hard a few years ago because I did not feel all prospery and I did not feel like things were good and I did not feel like there was a plan for me. And so then I had to say, well, if God has a plan for me, but I don't feel like it. And if God wants me to prosper and I don't feel like it, does God love me? What's happening here? And I don't know, that's not the God we serve, right? And so I was like, let me explore this first. So you back up and Jeremiah says, or God says to Jeremiah, tell the Israelites to do this while they're in exile. And it says, because I know when they're coming out, and it's not going to be for a long time, so you might as well get comfortable. So you go back and read this for yourself. I'm a big fan of that. But the very first thing he says to do is build your house. Put down the roots as if this is as good as it gets, buddy. Build your house. Then he says, plant seeds so that they might grow and then live off of that. Then find husbands and wives for your daughter so that they can have children. It goes on. There's another step in there, and then it says, pray for the town you're in, because even if the town you're in prospers, so shall you. Our God is so good that even in our season of waiting, he's provided a way for us to prosper. We don't have to wait for I have a plan for you to prosper. He says you can prosper right now, but you have to surrender and stop holding out on living your life in the moment and waiting to live your life until you're delivered. And that happens. That's what the grieving experience is like. We say, well, when I get through this difficult season of life, then I'll be able to do X, Y, Z. I'm just waiting on this to happen instead of focusing on what he said was build your house. Whenever I feel, and our God is an author of clarity, not confusion. So when I feel confused, I go back to that verse and I say, build your house. What would it look like to build your house today, Jessica? That's all you have to do. Build your house.
And I love that you said too, you don't have to wait for the go time to start.
It's now. Life is in session now.
When I was a stay-at-home mom, like I said this I always preface this, I don't know why, but another episode I said this in. I was talking about how when I was a stay-at-home mom, it is in my DNA to serve people. Like that is my gift. That's my love language, is serving, coming alongside. I don't have to even think about how to do it. It's just how I'm wired, right?
Yeah, you're a helper.
Yes. Yeah. And so when I was a stay-at-home mom, I didn't say, well, I'll start serving people once the kids are out of the house. We were in a new build, and there was construction workers. It was very hot. It was summer, very hot. I went and gave them bottles of water and hot dogs. Nobody needed to know about it. It didn't need to start. I didn't need to go serve those construction workers. We weren't even working on my house. I just noticed a possible need. Maybe they needed a cheer up. You know what I mean? Like you are so correct in what you said. It is so normal for people to go, well, this is how I'm wired. This is what I want to do, but it'll have to start at this point. It starts now.
Because we're grieving the fact that we've been given an idea or a thought and we lack the resources to effectively put it into motion now. And what I love about, being a steward is like that when you look at the gifts of the talents, and whatever you're faithful in little, you'll be faithful in much. And so if you create a life of stewardship over your gifts and talents, when it's not about what you do, but who you are, then you can say, okay, I have an abundance of things I wish were better, more or different right now. Maybe I can start processing those. What can I do now? Well, you can always build your house first.
Yes.
What does that look like? How do I love my husband well? I say this, here I am prefacing like you do, but I feel like there's people listening to this that have heard me say all this before, so I keep wanting to say, I say this a lot, but there's probably like everybody, no one's heard me say this before, but I do say this a lot if you're in my circle, right? But people don't have marriage problems. They don't have job problems. They don't have parenting issues. They have personal issues that impact the way they show up in all of these roles and responsibilities in their lives. And so we're hardwired to look externally to how we can solve problems. Like if my husband would, then I would, right? Conditional love. But we're called to an unconditional love, which means that I have to be who I said I was going to be before I require you to be another version of you, right? And we're never going to, like, most conflict comes from trying to change someone's perception of the world instead of just giving them a different perspective. So I don't need to change the way I perceive the world. I need to change my perspective on the world and know that my perception is my cumulative lived experience. So that's going to be different for you. We're all going to have different perceptions. But if I come in this and I try to change your perception of the world, we're going to have a fight. But if I come in here and I say, can I offer you a different perspective? What if the things that are holding you back aren't other people, isn't your job, isn't the time. It's the things incomplete within yourself. The things that you wish were better, more or different, that you've kind of categorically blocked or tried to jump over and trying, like that person trying to do a box jump at CrossFit for the first time and you got some skinned up shins you got to deal with, right? But don't let the fear of getting banged up stop you from practicing and developing the skill set, right? Grow your capacity, don't avoid the hardship.
And not putting our identity in the outcome and people
fall in love with the process, not the outcome.
Because I say, if you took away my podcast, if you took away speaking, if you took away every single thing that people see me do, I would still be who I am.
I love that.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because even when I had none of it, I was still who I am.
Yeah, because you're a steward over your gifts and talents, not the things you do in the world.
Yes,
right?
The things I do
are the outcome.
Yes, the things I do are just extensions of the gifts God has given me in order to, like, I've stewarded the little things well. And so he's gone, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of a branch. I'm going to extend it some more so that we can help people more. They're vehicles.
And just like a tree, sometimes you get pruned and you're like, oh, I got to grow again. I don't want to do this.
And it's like, this is not who I am. It is not my identity. I've said it before. Like, this is cool. This is fun. I love that we are able to reach more people. But if you take it all away, I remain the same. And I think that's so hard. And especially I have had women ask the question, what is my purpose? And a lot of times it's like the stay-at-home mom, and it's like your purpose, what you said, like, to steward what you're doing well.
And to let's detach the idea that purpose is something you're supposed to do.
Yes.
Purpose is more about being who God created you to be.
Yes.
And the fulfillment comes with doing your purpose and the outcomes that, so when people lack purpose, they will lack processes, and that will affect the people in their lives. And so really at the heart of it, it's helping people figure out, like, what is the purpose of being you? And like you said, when you were in those early stages of motherhood, you were speaking kindly, you were speaking with conviction, you were taking obstacles and turning them to opportunities to serve. So you were already doing all the things. You were serving those men or the women, or the people that were in your home. That was an obstacle that you turned into an opportunity to use your gifts and talents. And if we looked at life like that, is what my obstacle. And when I first went to this retreat, and I saw this before I ever passed my certification for being able to instruct people in recovering from grief, I spent 5 years overhauling my entire life. I was like, I'm not going to teach this stuff unless I can find, like, basically I set out to say, where does this not apply? So I overhauled my marriage. And I say that because I have a really great marriage, and I had a great marriage at the time, and my marriage is greater now because every time, even like, as good as it was then, I wouldn't have said we had any problems at all. But we did have different expectations. So like, you get married and you think it's going to be one way, and it turns out to be different. That different isn't bad. It's just different. But a lot of times in a relationship, the loss of expectations for how you thought it was going to be start driving the relationship, and you start loving from a place of if I will you, and conditional love. And if he would just do this, then I would feel much better. And if the other person would change, it would make my life easier. And that's a really dangerous place to be in a relationship and to be focused on. And so learning how to recognize the loss of expectations allowed me to fall in love in a different way, right? Because, and we laugh about it now, but when we first got married, my dad was a preacher. And so he was a very external leader. And when we got married, my husband's very internal processor. So he displays leadership differently. But because all that had been modeled for me was this external type of leadership, I was very critical of the way my husband led because it looked different. And so when I had this new information of being able to grieve the loss, and so like, you asked me one time what my event was about it. And when my dad died, it wasn't just my dad's death. That stuff I could handle. It was the loss of leadership in the way that I was comfortable with. It was the loss of expectations and hopes and dreams of the things that I thought we were going to be able to do together. So it was the loss of conversation. It was so many losses. It wasn't just a death. It was a lot of loss that came with that. And so learning to look for and fall in love with my husband's style of leadership gave, me that unique opportunity to not compare things. And there may be somebody listening that's like, duh, when did you get that memo? But for me, it was a really poignant lesson to learn to stop loving people the way I expect them to be, and which isn't really love at all. You know what I love? I'm putting, as you're saying all this, I'm actually putting words and perspective and understanding to, and I don't want to go down the marriage rabbit hole, but I do. But it's super.
I know. Well, because it is, it goes back for me to, you're talking about the loss of comfortability. And when one grows in marriage, then all of a sudden that level of comfort is gone, because now you have to find a new level of comfort for conversation, a new level of comfort for...
Well, that's why a common language is so important. So when I first started on this journey, Josh and I went to the workshop together, and he said, like, I'm going to support you, but I don't really feel like I have a lot to go for. And I said, well, I don't want to go and have an experience without you, because then we have our paths split.
Yes.
And so I want you to come for the shared experience and the common language, so that when I talk about this, I don't have to explain myself. And that bond for us has been so great, because it turns out that was something that would become a passion of mine. And because he was in my first workshop I ever taught, him and all my friends, I gathered them together. I was like, I'm going to do this, but if I do this, we need a common language now, and I want you guys to see what I'm going to be doing. And so all my friends were in our first workshop together. Communities are built around common languages. And so when a couple feels alienated from one another, it's often because they no longer speak the same language. They have a different language that they speak. So shared experiences, not shared outcomes, shared experiences are really important for couples. So when you talk about, like, for Josh and I, we go to a sporting event every year to have a shared experience, and we go to some personal growth, because that's my love language and his is sports. But he doesn't expect me to enjoy it to the capacity that he does, because I'm not him. That's his jam, his thing. But I go full on in, and I love the experience because I'm sharing it with him, and I get to see him light up.
You know what? I love this language that you're using, because it gives me verbiage to use. Hey, I want this shared experience, but I'm not putting an expectation on you.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of the reason spouses are like, no, I don't want to do that, is because initially we're like, oh my gosh, there's going to be an expectation of, I'm going to have to laugh at this. They were going to want me to or they're going to want me to learn this too. And there's this expectation of, like, dude, I do not want to do that. That's exhausting. But when you use the language you used of, hey, there is no expectation for a shared, what's the other one? Not experience, but...
a shared outcome.
Shared outcome. There's, and wording it like that, hey, I just want to have the shared experience, but it doesn't have to be a shared outcome. I think that changes the entire game.
Yeah, it surrenders, right? It falls in love with the process. So when we go do, like, a personal growth thing, I know that's not, like, his thing. And so I had to learn the hard lesson of, like, listening. It's like when you listen to the sermon and you know, like, 5 people in the room that need to hear that. And you're what did you get out of that? Hoping that they get the same breakthrough that you got from it. So this comparison thing, like, it divides us a lot. And so if we can create opportunities for shared experiences without having to be attached to a shared outcome, it gives us a lot more freedom to just be in the moment and be curious. How did you experience that? What did you see? What did you notice about the event? What was it like for you? And trying to live life in that way that's shared journey rather than your thing and my thing. That's really divisive in a relationship.
It is.
But learning also to surrender, and sometimes that is a grieving experience. So loss is not something that we... Like, when I teach these workshops and I do intensives like this, the goal is not to become 10 foot tall and bulletproof. It is just to learn how to triage the wound when it does happen. Because we're going to have loss that is part of our life. It's living, the things that are true are death, taxes, and living with loss. Like, it's part of our lived experience is dealing with loss. Sometimes, so when you have occurred a loss and then you have emotion, whether or not you get stuck in that emotion, the grief, depends on the tools and the capacity you have at that particular moment in life to reconcile the expectation of how you thought it was going to be versus the reality, in fact, that it is. And so not all loss is going to create this huge roadblock for you. You know, we see this, I love teaching this workshop on transitional loss in education, because if you saw kids come into a room that were dysregulated emotionally, and you thought to ask yourself, I wonder what this kid wishes was better, more, or different about the day, versus labeling that as a behavioral issue. I'm not saying there aren't. I'm saying that our go-to is, we've got behaviors today, right? Labeling these kids as that's part of their identity, is that they can't sit still or they can't do this. But instead you say, it looks like your mind is really busy this morning. I wonder what you wish was better, more, or different. That sounds very formulaic, but you can have organic conversation with that, right? if we were curious about that and we noticed patterns of behavior and we were wondering what was driving that, it would be a different conversation. But you think about how much loss a child can experience from the moment they wake up to the moment they walk in the school building. Maybe they thought they were going to wear their certain shirt and they didn't. And so maybe that loss isn't a big deal, but then they got served Cheerios instead of...
But I want to pause right there, because to some people it'd be like, yeah, well, that child should have just worn a different shirt. However, it was a loss to him, because how many times do us as adults not have the right outfit and it ruins our whole day? So let's just.
But that's when we get into the comparison mode. You cannot be comparison. You can't be comparative. You have to be curious.
Yes.
Wow, I noticed that not wearing that shirt really impacted how you're able to show up.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Right? And I picked my kid up one time. The power of this language is so important. I picked my son up one time from a sleepover, and he was happy in the house, sat in the car, started completely crying, shut up, closed up. And of course, as a parent, you're thinking, what happened? You know? And so I said, oh my goodness, what's going on? I don't want to talk about it. Okay. I hear that you don't want to talk about it, about what happened. I'm curious though, tell me something you wish went better at the event. And he was like, nothing. And I was like, okay, well, do you wish you had any more, something you wish you had more of? Nope. And I was like, okay, well, did anything go different than you expected? And he said, yeah. My friend's dad talks differently to him. I wish my friend's dad talked differently to him. And I was like, what do you mean? Tell me more about that. And he said, well, he talks really rough to his son, and that makes me sad because my family talks sweet to me. And when, he expanded on it.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have that process or having that conversation with him, we would have just shut down. But instead I learned more. And so we got to have a really great conversation about how different people communicate. And so I said, I know that this kiddo's dad loves him so much. They just speak different in their home. They have different ways they communicate with one another. So while I know it sounds really uncomfortable to you, that's all that kiddo knows.
Yeah.
And so they joke in a very different way than we do. They're not bad people. They just do things differently. But we wouldn't have even had that conversation had I not had tools to help him navigate the loss he was experiencing and put words to it.
Yeah.
So Better, More, Different is a really great tool. And then to notice behavior and wonder what is driving the emotional response is two pivotal mindsets that I have.
Which I think is good for marriage too. Because Daniel and I,
It's so
both,
powerful.
Oh my gosh. Daniel and I both, when we've had a long day and one of us is irritated, my go-to is to assume it's my fault. But that's also my trauma trigger response in life in general. If something goes wrong, I automatically assume it's me. It could have happened in a different room, different people. But if somebody comes out and they're mad, I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't even seen you guys today, but I know you're mad because of me. It's a trauma trigger for me, trauma response. And so, when Daniel comes home and is had a bad day, I automatically go, oh, I bet he's mad. I bet he's mad at me. I bet I did something wrong. But because I know my responses, because I'm self-aware enough, I know okay, wait, no, I probably need to ask different questions. I'm getting to a point, you guys. But I love that language that you use, that better, more, or different, because it pulls better than just, well, I don't want to feel like it's my fault, so can you please tell me what it is?
Right. I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel uncomfortable anymore. Please just tell me.
Yeah, and it's very selfish. And so I love that language. Also self-aware that yes, sometimes I just need to and I do. Jessica and I talked about this earlier. Sometimes I talk in a way as if I'm the old version of me, but it's just the way my brain works. So
there's a past.
I have grown, but yes, there is a past me that I talk in because I'm time blind as well.
But again, what you just said is really, really powerful, because I think that's common for people, is that I am the past, present, and future version of myself all the time, right? And so there are times where my capacity for showing up present in the moment is small. And so sometimes I do show up as the past version of myself, and I have to relearn a lesson, but I've collapsed time on learning the lesson, right? So I can get to a healthier space quicker because I have tools now. And if I had like one magic wand, it would be, or what I feel like part of my purpose is to help people grow the capacity to, with tools, to live in the present and live on purpose, right? And so I don't think there are bad people. I think there are bad people, right?
Yes.
But like, there's not, oftentimes what someone would say, someone's difficult or someone's, I have such a capacity for those type of people because I see people without tools.
Yes.
And skills, pills are not skills and skills are not pills, right? So there are times where you need medication to help with seasons of life. What I see a lot though is an overabundance of here's a pill for that and a lack of commitment to developing the skills. The skills are what gives us a common language. So then in my marriage or my relationship with a friend or anybody, any relationship that I have, if I have a common language and I have tools for that, so I can say to you, hey, I'm experiencing a loss of expectations here. I'm trying to figure out if it's pain from the past or it's present. I just need a minute, right? I'm an external processor, so I'm naturally going to want to talk everything out. Whereas my husband's an internal processor, so he's going to want to, when he speaks, he's already done processed, right? And so in order for that to not be polarizing and conflicting, then I have to say, I notice that you're coming across a little withdrawn. I'm wondering if you're processing something. He says, yeah, I am. Thanks for noticing, instead of saying, no, I'm fine, right? He can then use that language. So when we use tools and we use that language, some people think it sounds cheesy or silly or whatever, but it's so empowering because it lets the other person say they are using a tool, which means their capacity is super small.
Yes.
I need to tread lightly, right?
Yeah.
And just that common consideration and compassion for one another's journey of how they see the world. I used to similarly, and still do sometimes, when hubby comes home from work and he's what I perceive as disengaged or whatever. What's wrong? His immediate response, nothing. Something is wrong. Something has to be wrong because you're being, quiet and withdrawn. And then I go, oh my gosh, maybe I don't know my husband anymore. You go on this like spiral. Yeah. And what we had to come up with was like this, I said, when you say nothing, it feels like you're lying because I can tell that nothing's, something is. And I mean, there's something to be said for me just getting over it and moving on. And I get that, but that's not the dynamic we have. We want to have total honesty and engaged in our relationship. And so what I found was that there was something missing in that conversation, which were tools for having that conversation. What he didn't want to do was talk about it. And he felt like if he said something that I would just railroad him and be like, well, let's talk about it. And so he just said, it's easier to say nothing. And that was a gut check for me that I had to create space that he could say, yeah, thanks for picking up on that. It's just been a day. I just need some quiet time. Yeah. And without me, and me just trust that space, but
and respecting that space and not asking more questions.
Right.
Yeah. And I think as females, we want to do anyway, because we're very curious people. But I do think, like you said, again, two things can be true. Yes, if they say nothing and we know, we do need to respect space sometimes. But also, two things can be true. Sometimes it needs to be a little more like, well, let's just, you know what I'm saying?
Or you can leave it. And later you can come back and say, I noticed that you said nothing was wrong. And I'm wondering if you had time to process it, or I'm just still curious if there's still something going on. You can, if you have tools for conversations, it can be different.
Because not everything's so black and white. There's variables. There's so many variables. And I say that because sometimes I can get in that black and white thinking. But there's so many variables. Or like if somebody gives you a tool, well, there's different variables. That doesn't mean that tool, those questions, all the things, assess the situation, but that's also about being self-aware. Yeah. So I do like that you said that of, sometimes, yes, we do need to just give them space. And then sometimes, yes, we are allowed to ask those questions better, more different, it's variables. And I also, with that black and white thinking, I want to go back real quick a little bit where I said about success. and family and your, successes. Am I leading my family well? I don't want people to hear that as a female response, because it's just as important for men to gauge their success of, am I leading in my home well first? And I think it's such a go-to of, well, the woman's the nurturer, she's in all the things, therefore that really only applies to her in her career. Well, she's not successful in her career if she's not, no, it's true for men too. And Daniel is good at this. He is good about listening when I go, hey, I need you to create more space, more time. And he's really good at going, oh, okay. Because it's true for men and women, husband and wife, mom and dad. If you're not leading in your home first, then what matters otherwise? In my opinion, again, because I just wanted to make sure and clarify that so that people didn't go, or a husband didn't go, yeah, see, you're supposed to be nurturing first. And,
I don't know. We could have like multiple conversations here because, there's like this little talk I do on our by design nature. And I don't know if we want to go here or not, but you can cut it out if you don't. But it's really, we live in this comparative world that tries to put us against each other, like male leadership, female leadership. And it's a really exhausting conversation that means someone has to lose. And when we look at, in my opinion, the way I see the world and the way that I've looked at different elements, scripture, and looked at myself, and you can look at women throughout the Bible and see how they were more of an influencer than they were in that leadership role, right? Which leadership is influence. But women by design were created to be influencers, nurturers, and helpers. That's their by design nature. That's how Eve was created. And men are created to be providers, protectors, and leaders. And so when you get a fight between men and women, it's because they're struggling for leadership or influence. And if you get leadership without influence, you get dictatorship. If you get influence without leadership, you get this cyclical thinking of whatever's trendy. So you need both. And when you use, each person is leaning into their by design role, you get influential leadership. You get a helper and a provider. You get helping providership, right? And then you get a nurturer and a, oh my gosh, it just went out of my head. What's the third one? No.
I know.
I crisscrossed them too bad. Yeah. You get leaders, you get influential leadership, and you get a helper and a provider that work together. And then you get the nurturer and the... let's just scratch the whole thing because I can't think of it. The words, and the more I focus on getting it is not there.
Yeah.
Leader, provider, protector.
Yeah.
Nurturer and protector.
Yeah.
So that last piece is the nurturer and the protector come together, and there's no conflict because you get to nurture and he gets to protect. And that natural by design nature allows us to just be who we need to be without any fighting. And one cannot exist without the other, or bad things happen. And I just, when I see leadership in the home, I see my role is the leading part, right? Is the influencing and the shaping of the culture of my home, like, and nurturing my husband's leadership, influencing my husband's leadership. And I don't mean that as a submissive place. Like, do you know how big of a responsibility it is to steward over the influence you have? You look at scripture throughout time, and men that made bad decisions were usually influenced by a woman who did not have his best interest at heart. So forget leading anything. Your responsibility is to... That is a huge responsibility. Yeah. That's a full-time job, just trying to figure out how to be a good influence on the people.
Which doesn't take away your ability, women, to have careers. It doesn't take your ability to weigh...
No, it's just the way that you are designed. There is leadership in that. It's nothing... It's not... Like, we've got to surrender what you think you know about these roles and responsibilities.
The grieving.
Right.
Yes.
Like, okay, so you're not meant to be in the front of the room. How do you influence the person in the front of the room?
Yeah.
How do you nurture?
Yeah.
You know, nurturing like ranks pretty low on my list of voices that I speak. I'm the one that forgets to send thank you cards. I don't do that part well. The only thing I I use all my capacity for nurturing, like for my family.
No, same.
Because I don't have I know people who are fantastic nurturers and helpers, and like they're always, and I'm like, man, how do you do all that? I don't see myself that way at all.
Yeah.
So
I think it's empowering to know that. Like whenever, it's so empowering to know your strengths, because the weaknesses don't really matter then. Like I am not going to be crafty. Don't ask me to make my kids lunch. Don't ask me to craft. Don't ask me, like there's so much, and you'll hear me go, yeah, that's definitely not my strength. And I'm saying that like proudly, like I don't care that that's my weakness, but then people will be like, well, don't say that, like don't, like, but genuinely, like I know myself well enough, and I'm
do you equally take credit for your strengths though? Like, do you find yourself being able to say that's a strength of mine and not feel like you have to downplay your strengths so people don't think you're arrogant?
Wait, let me give you an answer and see if that's what you're asking. So at times, again, different variables, different situations, I can downplay my strengths because I don't want people to feel bad. Is that bad?
Yeah. So like what I'm saying is I'm if we want to talk about my weaknesses, we could talk about those all day.
Yeah. But I also don't mind. But let me also say, I don't mind to share my weaknesses.
No,
that's
really
what I'm
saying. Like it's fine for me to talk about that because people are okay with hearing about what you're not good at. Yeah. Are people okay hearing what you're good about? Yeah. You know, that's how you find your circle really quickly is, are there people that are willing to listen to the good about your life without going, well, must be nice for you? Yeah. Right? And we live in this world where we can get sucked into the negativity. Oh, let's just talk about all the things that are bad because it's uncomfortable to be, or people look for permission to succeed or to win. And so I find myself having a tendency to do that, downplaying how something was because I don't want other people to feel uncomfortable with my success. It's something I'll grow into all of my life, being okay with that. But I refuse to apologize for the goodness that God has given me.
You know what? A couple things come to mind with that I look at, just like self-reflection, is two things. Downplaying it because other people's discomfort makes me uncomfortable, which is a selfish view. And also knowing when somebody's just kind of beaten and bruised and down and reading the room and just being able to have the social ability to read the room and say, you know, I'm not going to talk about my strengths in this moment because that's not, you know, it's twofold, I think.
Yeah. No, totally.
Mostly it's because I don't like to feel people's discomfort. I'm very empathetic. Like if you feel, and that's the thing, like if you feel something, I'm typically feeling it too. And so like if you're uncomfortable, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. If you're sad, I'm going to feel, it's a little draining at times. But anyway, so I'm very cautious to be like, this is going to, and I don't, but again, I think too, I box myself in and I soundbite myself because I say things like that. But again, there's probably 10 other things that I could say to that. So anyway, but yeah.
You know, that's one thing that we do really well. I'd say I run the workshop, but when we have these workshops, what people come away with is a common language for conversation. And then we have a common language as like a little club because we went through the workshop together. But what people often don't say things or they don't engage in things is because they don't know what to say. Have you ever been in that situation? I don't know what to say, so I might as well not say anything at all. Because we're taught that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And then our discomfort in an uncomfortable situation, we either word vomit on somebody and say something stupid, or we say nothing and it come across as detached and unengaged. And so a lot of this is about getting comfortable with not having to have the answers. If I say, if you want to grow, you're going to have to surrender the I know. When you say I know, it signals your brain to stop seeking new information. So what do people do in uncomfortable situations? You tell me about a painful struggle and you say, oh, I know when I went through.
Yeah.
And so there's zero growth. It shuts down the conversation really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Instead of saying like, oh man, I recognize a lot of those feelings.
Yeah.
When I had a similar experience, or I'm really curious to see how is it impacting you. Yeah. When we know how to have those conversations, the world opens up to us. You know, it doesn't.
Which is hard for people who are connectors. And that's why it always, like that I know language, it always sounds like I'm including myself in this, we're one-upping, but it's really our way of connecting.
Yeah.
But I love how you educated on that I know and what that does for the brain, and finding another way to connect so that you can still be engaged and empathetic and listening and learning and curious while still connecting.
Because the intention was to connect,
yes,
right? It was
all good.
Yeah, but the words we use, and I will say the lazy language we use. My dad always said, say what you mean and mean what you say. And how many times do you find yourself saying something, it was misunderstood, and you said, well, that's not what I meant.
Yes.
So slowing things down and expanding our capacity and our vocabulary allows us to say, my intention is to connect with you. When I say I know, it's going to shut down our communication. So I can then say, wow, I really recognize, or I really resonate with those emotions. It reminds me of a situation that I had.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how is this situation impacting you? This sounds like there's a lot of similar experiences, but recognizing that their unique fingerprint means that they're experiencing it differently. So shared event, different impact and different experience. And so instead of trying to lump the experience as the same, we can say, oh, I recognize those circumstances. I'm curious to hear how it's impacting you. That's the relating. That's the connecting we want. Oh yeah, I've been there too. Chances are they're going to go, and how did you experience that? So it's, you know,
and if you're listening and you're like, yeah, but that takes so much time all in one process. But that's also the value of being slow to speak.
Slow to speak, and it's resilience, right?
Yeah.
When we first started introducing new language into our home, we did notice and wonder and better, more different, were big. I mean, like, it was annoying.
Yeah.
Like, it was so annoying because I was like, oh, I noticed it. But like, I had to literally put myself in jail to slow down, to change the way I speak to people so that I can be someone who says what they mean and means what they say. That's what creates alignment for me, is where I feel understood without having to feel like I need to explain myself. What I'm trying to do is create a connection with you because I care deeply. I'm not using language that empowers that moment. And so I do have to change the way I speak. I have to become informed about that process. And so it's a big passion of mine to teach people a new vocabulary as much as anything, because the vocabulary will help cultivate connections. And when we have common language, we'll have connection. And where we have connection, we have community. And where we have community, we create an impact.
Yeah, that's so good. Jessica, I am so appreciative of this conversation and everything. To end the episode, I always ask people, what is one thing out of anything that you want to be the encouragement that, like, if there's one thing you can remember, what is the encouragement takeaway from your heart that you just want everybody to know?
Like 1,000 things went through my head right now. You said the one thing to someone who's neurodivergent who has 100 ideas before breakfast.
It doesn't have to be one thing. What do you want? What do you want to leave with our audience? I want people to know that you have the right? One of my good friends, she says that you deserve to take up space in the world. Oh, yeah. And I love that. It's such an encouragement. Sometimes we don't think we have permission to be who we were created to be, or we look for that external permission. And I just want people to know that your past is part of you, but don't allow the present to be hijacked by the past. And every time we don't have
we're not complete with our past. We're letting the past choose the present and the future. And the past was for us to learn from, right? And maybe that's the one thing is I don't want you to focus on becoming 10 foot tall and bulletproof in life. I want you to learn how to triage the wound when you do take a bullet, right? Because that's learning how to be and to live with life instead of trying to avoid the casualties of life is what makes life beautiful.
That's so good. That was a good one.